Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Bringing Innovation and Creativity to the Hybrid Workplace, Part 2, Promoting New Ways to Collaborate. I'm Brenda Decker, Senior Fellow for the Center for Digital Government. I'm excited to serve as the host for today's webcast. Today's presentation is possible thanks to our corporate partners, Lumen and Cisco. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next hour. Before we dive into the content, I want to share a few brief housekeeping notes. After today's live webcast, the recording will be available on demand. Please use the recording for your reference or feel free to pass it along to colleagues. We've designed this webcast to be interactive, and you can participate in the questions and answer session with us by submitting your questions using the Q&A. Send in your questions as they come up throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many of them as possible during the Q&A portion. Also, during today's webcast, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. For those of you on Twitter, please use hashtag GovTechLive to share key takeaways, quotes, and some learnings from today's webcast. Currently, we recommend that you disable your pop-up blockers, and if you're experiencing any media player issues or have any other technical problems, please visit http://help.webex.com. We have two great speakers today. Tara Sumner is the Senior Manager for Global UC and C Product Management at Lumen. Her team ensures all products and feature enhancements in the Cisco portfolio meet Lumen's customer experience requirements. Our second subject matter expert is Charlie Garcia, the Senior Director of Collaboration for U.S. Public Sector at Cisco. In that role, Charlie sets the vision, executes the go-to-market strategy, and runs Cisco's collaboration sales organization for U.S. public sector. You may also see Matthew Fancher, who is the account director for specialized sales at Lumen. He is tuning in with us today as well, and you may hear him chime in later once we get to our live Q&A. But today's conversation is really going to focus on Tara and Charlie's insights. So let's get started. So I'm going to ask both Charlie and Tara to chime in on this. As we see public sector entities working to find the new normal, the elephant in the room is whether we're ever going to get back to 100% of employees being back in the office, or if hybrid or some other option is our new normal. Either option can be kind of intimidating or rather scary for employees. What does your crystal ball show you that it's based on what you're seeing in the market? You want to start on this, Charlie?
Sure. Thank you, Brenda, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. First thing I would say to you, Brenda, is I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't think anybody here would profess to have a crystal ball that could really tell what's going to happen. So the best way to do it is to look backwards a little bit and see if you can gather trends. Let me give you a quick statistic, and depending upon the analyst that you might pay attention to or read about, there are estimates out there of something like 30 to 60% of organizations in the US, whether they're private organizations or public organizations, have as the number one priority, what does the new work model look like? So the pandemic kind of pushed everybody into a short-term view, if you will, that we needed to work differently. But as we're coming out of this, I think a lot of organizations are figuring out, either for business purposes or purposes of their employees, whatever the purpose might be, that the days of the work as we used to know it may be over. And what does this new one look like? And how does technology help develop what this new work form looks like? But I think, at least here at Cisco, and I'll let Tara talk about Lumen in a second, we do believe, and our own company is moving this way, that we're looking at new work models and how our employees work in this new world. We do believe that the days of everybody going into the office fighting traffic on rush hour, those days are probably gone. But we don't have a crystal ball on what the new one is going to be. We can make suggestions and we can say, well, we see this, we see that, but there's no crystal ball. Tara?
Thanks, Charlie. I agree with you. There's no crystal ball, but I think also using your analogy of being able to look back and kind of predict, we are never going to know exactly when, if, how that work model is going to look. But what we do know, because of the historical nature of being in the pandemic and everyone being forced to work remotely, what we've learned is that it can be done and it can be done effectively, right? And that's probably the biggest progress that we've seen with the tools that we're using to connect folks, and being able to add that comfort level and the know-how or the expertise on how to utilize the products that are in front of you and make your business unit productive. That then allows us in the workplace to have a greater flexibility, so that you all aren't sitting in a conference room like the old days where you had that one sales guy who was always out traveling trying to earn a buck, right? And he would remote in, and everyone else is in a large conference room, and then the one remote person was kind of, fading into the background because everyone was focused on the conversation in the room. Well, now that we've all been forced into utilizing these tools with the remote workplace, and we've had to sort of navigate and figure out how to make your voice known and make the points that you're trying to make in your meetings, I think it has allowed us then to add whatever your business model needs to look like now versus 6 months from now versus a year from now, and still trust that the tools you are using are still going to allow you to be very effective in the job that you're doing.
I think you guys have hit it on the head. There's a new model that's out there, and we're all trying to figure it out. And so, I was a former state CIO, as you both of you know, and so I've got a question. So if hybrid or some type of hybrid is really my future, where do I start to attempt to figure out what I need to do next? What kinds of things do I need to consider? And I know you guys have both kind of been in the midst of all of this. So, Terry, you wanna start out and give me some pointers as to where I start.
Well, I think what you can do as an individual user of the technologies is still apply your corporate strategies, right? What's most important to you? Well, it's clear and effective communication and collaboration, but it might also be security, right? We're working in the government space. It's making certain that no matter where you are in the space and no matter where you're trying to connect from, that you can be secure in that connection. You can still be very effective. I mean, I'm not saying go take your laptop on the subway and hope that your call's not going to be interrupted a little bit. But if you find yourself in a workspace because you're being nomadic, you still apply the very same strategic philosophies that you do from a corporation, where you're making sure everything is secure. Everything, we've got data privacy in place. We are still communicating effectively, and we're transferring information that we need to effectively. And that when you're using tools that we're offering from Lumen, that are the Cisco suite, all of that has already been accounted for, because it's at our core values of making sure that when you are utilizing the tools, that you can do that without any hesitation, because that's how we designed it to be in the workplace, and it's very adaptable no matter where you sit, if it's a hybrid scenario or not. So either place.
Okay. Charlie,
Yeah.
is
Uh,
what we've done good enough?
Well, let me tag on to a little bit of what Tara said, and then I'll answer that question.
Sure.
So everything that Tara said, absolutely, we agree with. And let me turn it a little bit and answer the question with questions. And the questions I would ask, first of all, are you thinking in these terms? So if you're thinking in these terms, then you've got to ask yourself, in your um, business or whatever entity that you happen to be with, what are the things that you care about? What are the things that are going to be important to you? And I'll frame them in the context of a question, but I don't expect anybody to answer them. You have plans for a safe return to the office if office is the place where you're going to go back to. For some entities, going back to the office is kind of backburnered. But for certain entities, going back to the office is absolutely critical. Do you have plans for safe return? If you do, how do you plan to keep your employees informed of what's going on? That's important. One of the things we've learned at Cisco is that we have a hybrid environment where some people go into the office and some people go remote. One of the most difficult things is keeping everybody informed about what's going on, what's important, how it impacts them. And then there's one that maybe a lot of people don't think about. We've done a bunch of new hires recently who are used to going in their first day into an office, and somebody takes them by the hand and shows them the ropes, so to speak. If you are going to have an office environment, what's that going to look like? Is it going to be different than before? And what happens to those folks? If you don't go into an office environment, then that becomes a whole nother work stream. How do you onboard people? How do you onboard them and get them up to speed on the things that are important to your company? How do you keep employees engaged? One of the most common pieces of feedback we get is I feel isolated, always being at home. But I don't want to give up the ability to work from home every once in a while because I care about what the pandemic has done. But I want to go to the office every once in a while. So here comes the hybrid part. People really do care about engaging on a personal level. So what would be your plans to keep people engaged on a very personal level? Where does technology come in? And this may be down the road because technology is an enabler. Technology is not a decider. You really have to look inside your entity and say, well, what is it that matters to us? Ask yourselves these questions, and then step back a little bit and say, well, how can Lumen and Cisco help us through technology? We don't want to sit here and pitch technology because that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about how you go through the process of asking yourself these questions that might lead to a technology solution down the road. And if you don't mind, Brenda, ask the question you were going to ask me before.
Well, we all had to scramble to get people out of the offices during the pandemic. So is what I'd done good enough?
That depends on your perspective, right?
Or what you've done?
Because I think some businesses, some government agencies have done a lot, really have done a lot, and they're on the leading edge. And some probably haven't done enough. In fact, Cisco would tell you we probably haven't done enough yet. We did a lot to get our employees connected remotely from wherever they choose to be, whether that be at home, in an office somewhere. So we've done that. We have not conquered, though, the social aspects of it. We haven't done enough to get the social aspects of the workplace. If we did what was the easy stuff, get people connected, get people communicating, get people on video. But we haven't done the harder things yet, which tend to be more on the social side and on the people side of the business. So I think we got more to do there.
So, as you're working through that, how do you onboard new employees from different time zones and that sort of thing? I mean, those are the kinds of things I think we're going to be running into and really struggling with is you don't have everybody in the same place and the same thing. So I'm gonna kind of direct this back to Tara and say, so you guys have got this issue. And I think what's going to happen with public sector entities is they're going to start hiring people who don't necessarily live in the same time zone or in the same place. So how do you do that, Tara?
It's a good question. And as Charlie mentioned, what you first need to understand is what is your corporate strategy? What is your company strategy for bringing people back to the office? Because that will dictate a lot of the processes that we need to go through in terms of onboarding different folks from around the country or from other countries and time zones, right? And so if we know, and I can speak from the Lumen perspective, we know that we're going to maintain a hybrid scenario for the foreseeable future, right? Until we have the data behind us and the numbers and statistics behind us in all of the offices, right? So we're not just in the US, we're also in every region across the globe. And so those statistics need to dictate to us, when is it safe to go back to the office and how do we do that? And so if that's our strategy, that we're going to continue down this road of hybrid use, I think the best way to bring folks on board is to do exactly what we were just talking about. We have to include things like the social aspects. You start with a brand new team, you didn't even get a chance to shake their hand in person yet, right? That's been really hard, I think, for most humans without the face-to-face contact, the hugs, the shaking of hands to be able to do business. And so when you're bringing on a brand new team member who's going to grow into your family member in your office, what you need to do is you need to remember that they haven't had an opportunity to sit in the same office with me for the last 15 years, and they kind of, know the quirks of what's going on around the hallway. And so you absolutely conduct your meetings and you absolutely get your projects going and do smaller projects with the smaller teams, but make sure you're taking the time to set up and include social events. If it's a virtual happy hour, or if it's just we call it a virtual water cooler chat, and I don't always get to speak to the sales teams in my Asia Pac region or in my EMEA region. So we just set up those really informal water cooler chats to say, what's going on out there? What are you seeing? Oh, I saw the funniest thing today, and that adds that human element back in. But we also take the time to sit down and ask the questions of one another. How has being remote and using our technology affected your individual business? Because it's sometimes a little bit different in each region. And it's so refreshing to get that information back and forth to understand, oh, yes, I guess I never thought about using, the collaboration tools this way. Or, no, I really wasn't planning on strapping up the GoPro while I'm running the Boston Marathon, and sharing that with someone. But it's the use of the technology and being able to help one another conquer the challenges that they've got, that not only helps us as a company, but from a product perspective, it gives us ideas on what's next. How do we develop the next feature, the next functionality, right? What's the next, cat filter or whatever that we need to apply to this technology, right? So I think that's part of bringing in the onboarding of people, is being able to share those experiences across the time zones, across the regions, and just let the other folks know that they're still a part of the same group. And one day when we all get to go back to WebEx1, we can, meet for drinks one day in the hotel lobby.
I would add a couple things to that, Brenda, because Tara brings up a great point. Pre-pandemic, if I can use that word, we were kind of conditioned to using tools like the one we're using right here today as a business tool, as we're having a meeting with somebody to discuss business items. And it took a while so back to your example about how do you onboard a new employee, it took a while for our leaders to be okay and our individuals to be okay with using what was perceived to be a business tool as a personal tool inside of an entity, whatever that entity is. And so we started. Tara brought up the point about virtual happy hours. They were starting to explode here at Cisco in a very positive way, by the way. And people got really, really creative. They were doing game shows, and they were doing wine tastings, and they were doing cheese tastings, all virtually. But it took a while to break the condition that people's assumption was what we're using here right now cannot be used for social aspect, but it definitely can. And we broke through that. It took us a while, but we definitely broke through that.
So does that mean you're going to start distributing cheese and wine to all of us, Charlie?
I'm not an expert there.
Yeah,
Glad to, though.
that's a great
I'll-
point though, because I think in government we all sit back and we go, this is a government tool. I can't be doing that kind of thing on a government tool. And that's a great point, because you really do. You need to get people engaged not only in the business but in each other, and you've just got to do that, and there's no other way.
have a confession to make, because I've been part of a sales organization for over 30 years, and almost all of it traveling a good 30, 40, 50% of the time. And you know what? Travel was becoming a grind. Canceled flights, long lines, bad food in hotels. I think anybody that's ever traveled knows it, and I was saying, I'm not sure how much longer I can do that. And then this pandemic hit, and I got into being able to use the tools to do business very successfully, very efficiently, while still interacting with people. But one thing you cannot miss is people still need people-to-people interaction. I said to my wife the other day, even though at Cisco we still can't travel, that's part of our business priorities. I said to my wife the other day, I cannot wait to get on another airplane, because we miss as people and human beings, we miss that human interaction, and you can't overlook that aspect when you put your strategy together. It can't be, that's why we call it hybrid. It probably can't be 100% remote, but it probably won't be 100% in person either. And there's that delicate balance that nobody can dictate. You have to ask those questions that Tara was so eloquent about. What's important to your entity? What's important to your people? What's important to your business? And then draw up a strategy from that generates a hybrid environment for you.
You know, you bring up a good point, Charlie, as you're talking about you need that human interaction and that sort of thing. I want to switch gears just slightly on that topic with you. So I am a public entity. I'm a state CIO. I'm a city official, whatever, and I deal with suppliers and I deal with customers. So now all of a sudden I've got 3/4 of my staff that are participating virtually. How do I make that mesh work? How do I go about getting that? What should I expect from the suppliers? What should I expect from my customers?
That's tricky. That's a great question. Very tricky. I'm not sure anybody solved that one yet, because the supplier may have a very, very different strategy for how they deal with post-pandemic work environments than you do. They may want to say, oh, no, everybody's going to the office, or they may say, no, everybody's going remote. And we've had that situation where we've talked to customers, and in order for us to visit a customer right now as a business imperative at Cisco, you need pretty high approval, and you need to have I won't go into the details, but you need to have other things, the other check boxes marked off. So we've gotten to the point where we're starting to reach out to customers, say we might want to come out and see you, and they'll say, please don't. Let's use WebEx. Let's use virtual, because we have not gone back to the office yet. And our employees are uncomfortable coming back to the office or seeing a vendor, which we would be. So you have to be very sensitive to what's on the other side and what their strategy is. And so, again, you're going to have to ask a lot of questions. The net of it, though, I think if you would peel the onion on all of that, there is an infinite number of tools and facilities that once you get your strategy right, that you can pretty much mold it to how that would work. Whether it's with a vendor who isn't seeing people live, to a sales organization that wants to go and see people live, and somewhere in between. But I think once you organize your strategy, so there's a theme evolving here. Once you organize your organization strategy and care about the most important points, we'd be glad to help you with the technology. But the technology does not solve the problem for you if you do not have that good strategy.
So Tara, I mean, what is Lumen's way of dealing with some of these issues with as Charlie said, there's a lot of companies that plain aren't traveling anymore, but there are a lot of customers that plain aren't allowing people to come into their buildings that aren't there for a reason that they've approved. So, how do I deal with the fact that, I may need to be talking to somebody about a strategy, and it's really tough to get somebody in to have that conversation.
Well, I think Charlie hits the nail right on the head there. It's about communication, right? My company's strategy, while very similar to Cisco's company strategy, is not exactly the same, and that's okay, right? And from a Lumen perspective, our company has essential workers who have to go into the field and fix connections in order for this technology to continue to work, right? So sometimes you're forced in there, and you hear the cheers in the neighborhoods from the guy who comes to to the neighborhood to fix something, and they finally get, the internet's back up or your phone's working or whatever the issue was, and you're so thankful that they came and risked, the exposure into the neighborhood to get that done, but you're just so happy about it, and you think, gosh, how would we be able to do this if nobody had a plan, right? And it's really about that communication of, what's your strategy, what's my strategy, and what do we all agree would be the comfort level? Are we all doing the elbow bumps instead of, fist pumps and handshakes? Okay. Am I all right if I come and visit you with my mask or my face shield on, or you want me in a hazmat suit? I'm in, whatever it takes, right? And it's just a matter of making sure that we're all communicating that, because we have all been put in this situation where, yes, we have to continue to do business, but the way that we have been able to do business in the past was very separate from our personal lives. And I would leave the office and come home, and nothing necessarily that I brought from the office would intertwine with my home life. But if you are a caregiver of an older parent at home, and now you're in the midst of this, pandemic sort of reshuffle of how things work, that's going to affect my everyday life. I really want to go and see Charlie, but I may have to resort to the elbow bump until, such time that we're not afraid to bring something home to somebody else. And that's okay. It's just a matter of what is that comfort level and how you communicate with your vendors, with your suppliers, and you come to a common ground of, okay, this is what I need to get from you, Brenda. Could you bring somebody out to sign something? And you say, could we sign that electronically instead? Absolutely. Absolutely we can. Let's do that, right? It's just a matter of that communication and understanding, I think, and how we cooperate. And we're good at that. So I think, as humans, we're very good at that. So we should be able to be just fine.
Yeah, I
Brenda,
agree with you. I think you've got to get that communication. Go ahead, Charlie.
we've talked a lot about strategy and you have to have a big picture. If we could dive one level deeper, because there's different constituents now that you need to have conversation might not be strong enough. You need to have a plan for the employees. So Tara makes a great point. She's going to elbow bump me. That may require, if you're going to go to office space, to do maybe something different in the office than you would have before. I'm not sure what that is yet, but you might have something different to do. You have the business. What is the business's priorities? We still have to conduct business. Most people on this call still have to conduct government work. So there's the individual, the employees up and down the chain. There's the business. There's the facilities people who now may want to change how they think about space and where they get space and how the space is laid out. There's the IT team. So this is where we're good. We can really coach the IT team on the technology that could help you achieve what your plans are. But each one of those constituents, if you put them all together, they should be working together. But make no mistake about it, there is definitely constituents. And we learned some of it the hard way here at Cisco ourselves. And just to give you some anecdotal information on that, something that worked really well, but it took a while before it started, is our CEO does regular employee check-ins for all employees around the world. That's not necessarily something that somebody on this call has to do. It's something that we chose to do. But he chose to do it as feedback from the employee base that we were losing touch. And so he instituted that, and that was something that was important to the business for our CEO, and it has worked out very well. And he even uses the technology less in a business way. So going back to that comment we made before about condition to using it as a business tool, he shows up in t-shirts. He used to show up in suits. And that sent a message to everybody that we definitely are in a different world and it's okay.
Yeah, and I think we're sitting here, like you said, in a different world, and it's we're all trying to figure out what is okay and what the new okay is, and that's different, I think, with the people that we work with and the people that we are with all the time, whether we work with them within our organization or we work with companies like our provider companies that come in and work with us, or people that actually interact with us. Uh, customers Customers is kind of another different thing. I mean, most people got a little bit used to the fact that during the pandemic, they had to do things differently with government, and a lot of them used some tools, and a lot of them got very used to the tools not really doing what they needed them to do. And I think that was a very frustrating thing. So how do we and I may let Tara try this one first, and sorry to spring this on you, but how do we feel about, or how do we work towards trying to get our customer base, which is John Q. Public, to help us work with us and understand that there are some things that are going to be a little bit different. Like Susie's going to be answering that phone from her house, and she may not have everything at her fingertips or need to do some things. Or I know Susie's answering that from my house. How secure is Susie's house? So those kinds of questions. So Terry, you want to try to jump on that and help me understand how I kind of get over that hurdle?
Sure, sure. I mean, there's definitely a reason that Cisco and Lumen have been in this business for a long time, right? These are not necessarily new challenges for us to solve. It's a new circumstance where these challenges have presented themselves, right? Brenda, you bring up a great point. Here's Susie working from home, and how is that different? Does she have the right equipment? Well, perhaps we need to get a new Cisco headset like this one right here, uh, that allows you to have a very clear way of communicating, and you can hear people and have the noise cancellation. If you're like me and you have children that run around all over the place and they sit around and eat up all your bandwidth all day, right? You have a whole new set of issues in the home office environment than you do within the actual office environment. And when you're trying to do and conduct government work, you still have a very stringent set of plans around privacy data, around security, around all of those things. And that starts with the equipment, right? Maybe it is the headset that we need to get on so nobody in the background can hear what's going on, even if it's just your dog or cat. But you then need to talk about, all right, we're doing business, we're trying to make sure that we're conducting transactions and making sure things are working exactly as they would have normally. Well, normally, that's a different name, right? So what do you consider? You have to consider the layers of security from the data. Am I connected to directly into my Office VPN where I have entered that layer of security? Do I need an additional encryption from my home Wi-Fi to my Office VPN? That may be something else that we need to consider, right? Maybe we were at home and our Wi-Fi didn't have a password that was, what you would consider a good password. If you use password 123, that's not a good password. But you might have to change some of the things that you did at home to make yourself a little more secure, which is always a good idea. But then that will allow you to use that as a building block for how you put this out there into the workspace, right? How we connect back and forth with one another. Maybe we're leaving documents a on a server to have access to, right? And we have firewalls and tunnels that we need to get through to make sure that that's there. All of those things are still in play. It's just that instead of the third floor office that I was in, now I'm across town an hour and a half away, and I still have to make sure that that tunnel that I use to get to the information is secure, but is also large enough, fast enough for me to work at the pace of business, right? Lots of good stuff to consider.
Tara, people might think we rehearsed this. I can vouch for the fact we did not rehearse any of these questions, but listening to Tara's answer, dovetails into my very next point. In the frenzy of the mid 2020, when the you know what hit the fan, people came to us in a partnership with Lumen and Cisco and said, "We just need to get going. What can you do?" And it was, "Give me a stopgap, give me something. I need to keep the business going." People have stepped back and said, "Okay, we did this right, we didn't do this right." Tara talked a lot about security. That was one that got overlooked a lot in the frenzy of mid 2020. So customers are coming back to us and saying, "Okay, let's do this." And no disrespect for anybody out there. They had to do what they had to do. They're coming back and saying, "Let's do this a little bit more professionally now." Security matters. Strategy matters. Vendor matters. The technology matters. We just can't go pick something up. So we're starting to see a lot of that, Brenda. And I'm going to speak for Terrace, and I think that they see the same thing at Lumen. There was a frenzy early on that got people started. It kind of got through the knothole, and now they know that back to the way we started this. The workplace is probably never going to go back to the way it was before. So now, how do we do this professionally? How do we do this securely? How do we do it such that our employees are engaged? How do we do it such that our business thrives? Now they're engaging in much deeper conversations with us.
Yeah, it's no longer a temporary strategy. It's just the strategy.
The strategy. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I mean, you're right. A temporary strategy is exactly that, temporary. And I think some people have tried to say, well, we're going to just make our temporary strategy our ongoing strategy, and you really need to adapt to what's happening next. I mean, it's not something you can just say, well, this is it. No, now we're moving forward, and Katie barred the door. I want to remind people that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll love to get to those here in a few minutes, and try to answer as many questions as we can. So how do you plan the work for people? What kind of things do you have to do for that, Charlie?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
How do you plan the work for people? I mean, how do you make sure that they're doing what you need them to do?
When you say plan the work, you're talking about from inside of Cisco with our employees?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, as you might imagine, we have a lot of technology.
Yes, obviously.
So we have been able to, over time, really learn how to use the technology. I mean, if we go back just 3 years ago, I would have loved, if I could, to take a poll of the audience when a video conference was scheduled. How many people actually turned the camera on? I would be willing to bet just as little as 3 years ago. And by the way, I'm guilty too. I didn't turn my camera on because I didn't want to see it. I didn't want people to know that I was wearing shorts instead of long pants. So I didn't turn the camera on. I'd like to do that poll maybe of the audience here, but now it is rare that somebody's not on video. And the comfort level that I'm going to use my team specifically, because I communicate my team with this technology quite a bit, is quite comfortable. Nobody has to put on in the case of some folks, a suit and a tie. They're okay showing up because I called them at 8:30 in the morning on a video, and they just got off their bike and they sit down and take the call. So there's a comfort level that, and I'll speak for Cisco, and I'll let Tara speak to the Lumen folks. It is very, very comfortable, and we can get a lot done in what I call hundreds of 30-second conversations that you might have had when you were at the water cooler. You're just now having them like I'm doing here over this video. That would not have worked as well 3 years ago if we had a blank screen and no video. So a lot of the water cooler talk, hey, I just passed somebody in the hall. How's that deal going? That's a common question here in the sales organization. How's that deal going? I just hit the little button here that has your face next to it, and within seconds we have a video. We talk about it, and then we move on to the next one. So I would say that we do a lot more hundreds of 30-second conversations as opposed to everybody meet in the conference room at 10 o'clock. That make sense?
I would agree with Charlie there. It's it is a comfort level. And I had to remember, right, when this pandemic first hit and the big panic was around about, oh my gosh, I need tools, and how do I, teach my kids how to get on their call with their teacher, and how do I, holy smokes, we had all sorts of madness going on here, and I forget this is what I do for a living. So I have the basic tools to figure out how to make the technology work the best way. But the people who needed this technology most are not people who've been doing this for 25 years, right? They're people who didn't ever want to be on camera. They didn't want to know how to utilize all of these tools. And now we have a new empathy there, right? And it has, as Charlie says, become more comfortable because it is the strategy, not the temporary strategy, but the strategy, and saying, okay, sure, you can call me at 6:30 in the morning, but I will be wearing my, workout clothes, or taking the dog for a walk, or whatever it is that I'm doing. And yes, we're comfortable with that because we know we can still get business done. But we also had to take that step back just briefly, even within Lumen, to say, who would like to just get back to basics and do a real quick how-to training, right? How to get logged on and how to ensure that, your video is showing the right background, or the, whichever mute button I've got, it's not just the headset mute button, then the on the screen mute button, then you get the, well, hold on, I'm trying to find the mute, hang on, right? So just a basics training. And it's not because, these guys couldn't get that. It's they were never forced to use the technology before. And now they're such experts, they call and send, call me up and say, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this too? And you go, I'm a product person. Let me get my pen. Let me write that down, right? And I'll take it to the development group and see if we can make that happen. I just call Charlie's buddies and say, how about this? Can we make this happen? Right. So it really is. It's about, that comfort level, and it's about making sure that everyone's on that same playing field with the tools that we've got out there, so that there's a trust, right? It isn't just, oh no, I'm going to have to be on camera. It's, yeah, whatever, we're going to be on camera. That's a given. And here's what I'm going to cover today. And it's going to be the sales funnel. And it's going to be, this strategy and the customer meeting, etc. Right. It's no longer the focus of every meeting, the technology. It's the how to have the meeting, right? And I like that comfort level.
Yeah, it's exactly it. You start using the technology, and all of a sudden, people start coming up with new ideas and different things that they keep
Absolutely.
thinking, oh, we should do this and we should do that. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you guys, just because I think it's, we've heard a lot of the things that can be done and sort of things, but both of your companies have been doing a hybrid virtual environment for years. I mean, I worked in the corporate area, and I was a virtual employee for a period of time as well. So I know exactly, um, not exactly, but I know a lot of what you guys are doing. So the question that I've got is, as employees, talk a little bit about your experience as employees of your company, and having both employees that report to you that are virtual, you being virtual. What's that experience been like for you guys? What's the real world of a hybrid environment? And I'm probably gonna let Charlie start with that. Because I know Cisco has done it for a long, long time.
Yeah, so we're lucky at Cisco that it's part of our company philosophy that employees matter. And so there's a lot of communication to employees about how does this work? How does that work? Let's try this, let's try that. So we have a lot of that that goes on. And that goes a long way because it gives credibility to the people that are putting the tools in place, that they have some input from the constituents that are going to use those. So we've been very good at that on a business level. On a technology level, uh, this whole hybrid work has been a centerpiece for our product units on developing the technology, the products, the systems, the services, the communications to satisfy the hybrid work environment. So I'm going to say we've been lucky. One, because we've got great leadership that thinks about its employees, and we also have technology. So it's an easy answer, to tell you the truth. We have the technology that makes us easy. The harder part was what we talked about earlier, getting people to accept it, getting people to turn that video on, and get them unconditioned from thinking it's a business tool and it's just a communication tool. It's no different than getting up from your desk inside of an office, walking down to the water cooler, and you run into Tara at the water cooler and say, Tara, how you doing? You can do that still. It's a different construct, still very effective. We're just conditioned to the other one. So it's taken us some time to get that conditioning, if I can say so, because even 3 years ago, 90% of the people did not turn their video on. It would be rare if somebody didn't turn their video on, and to the point where somebody would say, is everything okay? Your video is not on, and somebody will come back and say, well, I'm not at a place where I can really turn the video on because I'm in my child's school auditorium or something, right? And that is perfectly okay. So that's what I would say to that question. It's a relatively easy answer for us to say here, because we got the two most important things. We got leadership and we got the technology, and then the leadership to implement the technology.
And I think to add to that, Charlie, you're being modest when you say you guys have been lucky, because I do know that there are other vendors out there in the world, and what I've seen through this whole pandemic is it had nothing to do with luck. This was all intelligence, right? Cisco went out and said, here is the technology that we are going to utilize for business tools, right? Other vendors, let's say, went out and said, here is the technology we would like you guys to use for personal tools. When the pandemic hit, there was an evolution, if you will, for these tools to be utilized the way we're doing them today, right? Taking a business tool and modifying its use to then become the communication tool, personal tool that it is today. That was a much easier evolution for a company like Cisco, because they built it right to begin with the security, right, with the tools of how to communicate. And I'm not saying we had every, bell and whistle and what was it I said before, cat filter, none of that stuff, right? Because it was a business tool. But adapting these awesome business tools to our lives within the remote spaces was much easier than our other competitor vendors, who had to take a very personal use and personal look at their stuff and go, ugh, we never really added security to this. Now we're going to have to spend time, money, and effort and do it quick, because people need that right now, right? So when Charlie says that they were lucky, okay, sure. Nah, they were smart to begin with. They really were. And the layers that we put into not just the actual technology, but the use of the networks and how we get them there. I think I used the term, we all built it right the first time, so we didn't have to go back and rebuild it after we did this, this transition into the hybrid unit. So I agree. It's a matter of being able to be comfortable, and it's a matter of being able to have all of this technology there. But it goes back to that strategy play within the companies and corporations. At Lumen, that's really one of our main strategies, is we've got to figure out how to build it right and make sure that those are the things that we hit, right? So that we've got that redundancy. So when, holy cow, the whole world got sent home in an afternoon and we doubled our capacity in a day, and Charlie calls and says, hey guys, just making sure you have enough capacity, I can go out to our network and look and go, holy smokes, look at that. Oh yeah, we built it out there the right way the first time. So it was okay. We didn't have outages, those kinds of things. It was strategy. But then we're able to quickly adapt and use the market to tell us what's next, what needs to be tweaked, how do we change that, and how do we get it into the hands of our users today, That's really what it was. I wish it was just luck, Charlie. But
Thank you,
not so
Tara.
much.
That was very kind of you.
So I've got a question that pertains a little bit to I guess our audience. I'm assuming our audience, because at least it's something I want to know. I obviously, being in a state environment, you've got a lot of requirements to meet, federal guidelines, all those kinds of things. Now I've got employees working from home, and they may be using virtual phones. They may be using, their IP phone off of that belongs to my company and that sort of thing. You know, what about 911 requirements and things that are coming out as they relate to the home worker? How are we dealing with some of those things?
Wait, answer
Maybe
first.
I'll go first if you want. So from a 911 perspective, you're absolutely right. This is an evolving technology, and what has happened in the last 2 years has probably been more changes, more regulations than I've seen in a long time. And way back in a previous life, I was a dispatcher and an EMT. And so it kind of has a special place in my heart. But what's interesting to me is that we say, okay, we have a brand new regulation, goes into effect in January, and ready, go, right? The government says, ready, go to all of the suppliers. Here's what you need to hit. You need to have all of these things in place. And it's a complicated dance, because it isn't just me as a service provider going to my vendor Cisco and saying, hey, can you guys give me your emergency responder capability, attach it to every technology at Cisco, and just deliver that right on over, and we'll put it in, and it'll ride down our network to the PSAT, and life will be happy, and everybody will get what they need. That, I really wish it was that easy. It really is a complicated dance of, what is the actual regulatory item? What is the response that we need to make sure that we get? And how do we then ensure that it's not just the network that is responding to the regulatory, but that we're also asking from the vendors, you need to send us XYZ, so we've got your mobility, we've got, right, all of the things that we can pull to find your location. It's not just an address, it's fourth floor, cubicle 409, whatever. Those items have been very, very prevalent in the last year and a half. And I know that in working with the product folks over at Cisco, we've also had some cool challenges of how things work a little bit differently per product, as they should. But we need to then connect those dots from a customer experience perspective and make sure that, regardless of how many cool, fun configurations we have to do, it's a seamless transition over to the end customer. Because when they're picking up the phone to call 911, they don't want to know about your features. They want to know it works and someone's going to come and help me right now, right? So it's been quite a challenging ride, but I think it's been a very interactive discussion between vendors and partners to make sure that, not only are we developing things on our side, but then I can call up and say, Charlie, I got something new. Can we test this out? Let's just give it a ride and see what happens, right? And that collaborative partnering has been very, very valuable when it comes to doing the 911.
Yeah, it's interesting you pick 911 because it's ultra important, one, but two, it's the one that we probably get the most questions on once we sit down with a customer and say, look, this is how the environment that you care about, this is what your strategy is, this is what your plan is, let's put the pieces together. Somebody always raises their hand and say, but what about 911? Because nobody wants to be on the other side of that call that doesn't have a location to where that 911 call is coming from. So I won't go into the technical details here, but we partner with companies like Lumen and others to provide that 911 service in a transparent way. So it's an important one. For everybody that's on this call, you should always ask, whether it be Lumen, Cisco, it doesn't matter who the vendor is, always ask, what is your 911 strategy? It's the most important thing you can ask once you start to get into the nuts and the bolts. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, I know this is an informational forum, and I think I speak for Tara as well. I think everybody on this call is probably a customer of ours or in our vertical in one way or another. If there's something that piqued your interest here and you want us to go deeper, reach out. Please reach out. I don't know how that would be done, Brenda, relative to this event here, but everybody on this call probably is a constituent of some sort for the partnership between Cisco and Lumen, and we would be glad to come out and provide as much or more detail as you need.
Perfect. We've got about maybe 5 minutes here left, and I've been trying to pick out some of the questions that have come through on the chat and through the Q&A. So if anybody's got a question that's really burning in their pocket, go ahead and put that in. But one of the comments that came through is a little bit of a touchy subject of you were talking about visiting people's workplaces, and we have to make sure we're having conversations with them, and we're making sure we understand what, whether it's going to be the fist bump or we're going to do the elbow knock or what we're going to do. Several places are starting to have vaccine policies. What are you seeing as far as your company's responses to, I want proof of vaccination? Any thoughts on that?
It is a tricky one.
You bet it
is a tricky
is.
one. And I think it's difficult too. And Charlie, you may notice this from a Cisco perspective, right? We're in a bajillion states, right? We've got offices all over the place. And so you have very different state and local government regulations around vaccine policies. And then our company has to kind of wade through all of that and determine what's our strategy. And our CEO has sat down with all of our senior leadership, and their answer was, we've got to go with the highest common denominator. If we've got some state that says got to be 100%, and other states that go, well, we could be a little more relaxed on that. As a company, we have to operate to the highest requirement. And so for Lumen, we do have a vaccination policy of 100%. And we have had recently to, within our systems, be able to provide proof of vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. Should you come into a situation where, like me, I'm always the one with my hand up, please let me go to WebEx 1 in person. Pick me, and the next question is going to be, do you meet those vaccination requirements? My company can pull that information right away in a report and say, yes, she's allowed to go, or no, she's not, right? So we have the information readily available, and I think it's really difficult for CEOs and boards to decide what that policy needs to be, because if you are in different states and you have different regulatory requirements, it's very difficult to try and manage and maintain that. So we have just said, let's just operate at the most stringent requirement and go from there.
Not too dissimilar, maybe a little bit different. We do not have a mandated vaccination proof to be employed, but we do have a mandated vaccination proof to enter an office that is owned or operated by Cisco. So if you are uncomfortable with a vaccination, then you don't go to an office. You continue using the hybrid virtual world. If you want to go into an office that is owned or operated by Cisco, then Cisco will mandate a vaccination proof. External to Cisco, no employee, if a customer or vendor or supplier mandates a vaccination proof, Cisco does not necessarily enforce that to visit them in person. Cisco will encourage the person to have the virtual meeting with the vendor, the customer, the supplier. Likewise, people who do not, customers, suppliers, and vendors who do not have mandates at all, but we have employees who are uncomfortable visiting an unmandated customer, supplier, or vendor are not forced to do so, obviously. So they go and they're encouraged to do it virtually as well. So it's a little bit of it depends.
Yeah.
It depends. But there is no mandate to retain employment with proof of vaccination. Just entering an office, and the opposite when going externally. If the external entity requires proof of vaccination and you are uncomfortable with that, you do not have to provide it. If you are uncomfortable with entering a place that does not have a vaccination mandate, you also are not forced to do so.
Thanks. I saved the toughest question for last.
That was a tough one. That was a tough one.
So I'm going to ask our audience if you can hang on here for just a few seconds at the end of this. We have a small request for some feedback. So I want to be respectful of our time commitment. So we'll wrap it up here. In closing, I'd just like to thank Tara and Charlie, as well as Matt. Matt, thanks for hanging around. So in case you had a question, you could take it. I'm surprised
I did my best. I did my best, but yeah.
But I want to thank everybody for sharing their insights today. I also would like to thank Lumen and Cisco for making it possible to have this important webcast today. I think we've got a lot of great information. And thanks to the audience for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you soon at another government technology event. We'd like you to help us out by participating in a quick audience survey. Really, it's just one question asking why you registered for this event. So if you can hang on for 1 second, we'll bring that up. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone and have a great rest of your day.